Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Amanda Anderson. Amanda Anderson was born on October 10, 1990 in Fridley, Minnesota to Mark and Stacy Kennedy Anderson. Amanda grew up to be an aspiring writer with a passion for words, music, and life. She graduated with honors from the Tyler Gospel Chapel School in 2009 and worked at Trinity Mother Frances while attending Tyler Junior College, where she majored in English literature. On September 15, 2010, 15-year-old Nate Anderson found his sister Amanda dead on the floor with multiple bullet holes in her head after returning from a jog. He had gone out to clear his head while doing homework, but became stressed and returned to find the door kicked open. Nate immediately called 911, describing the scene without touching anything. When investigators arrived, Nate recounted the events, still shaken. The investigation revealed that Amanda was shot while sitting on her bed, causing her to fall to the floor. The killer removed shell casings, suggesting a revolver was used. Amanda's death was devastating to her parents, who were deeply religious and couldn't comprehend who would commit such a heinous act. Their daughter had just graduated from high school and was trying to find her way in life. She had no enemies and wished no one harm. The investigators canvassed the neighborhood where the crime took place, speaking with residents to gather information about Amanda and her family. Uniformly, the people they interviewed described the Andersons as a tight-knit, religious family. One neighbor offered a possible theory about Amanda's fate. He pointed out that the area was previously crime-free, but 2 weeks before Amanda's death, a house in the neighborhood was robbed. It's possible that the same person was involved in Amanda's murder. The neighbor suggested that the perpetrator might have seen Amanda's brother, Nate, go for a run, then broken into their house. If Amanda witnessed the break-in, the robber might have shot her to silence her. To explore this theory, the investigators needed evidence to determine whether a botched robbery led to Amanda's death. Typically, burglars who are caught by homeowners will go to great lengths to prevent them from calling the police. However, in this case, nothing was taken from the Anderson home, and Amanda's room was left undisturbed. Amanda's home was burgled, but the thief didn't take anything valuable, including jewelry and a laptop. Amanda's father, Mark, checked the house and confirmed that nothing was missing. This led the investigators to question whether the break-in was actually a robbery gone wrong. The forensic team searched Amanda's room and the entire house for evidence, collecting fingerprints and hair samples that didn't belong to Amanda or her family. They also took the clothes Nate wore when he found Amanda's body, even though they didn't have any visible bloodstains. This was consistent with Nate's 911 call, in which he said he hadn't touched anything. The police still sent the clothes to the lab for further analysis, along with other evidence. To begin their investigation, the police first had to rule out Amanda's family members as potential suspects. They asked her father, Mark Anderson, to show them all the weapons in their house, which was a common practice in Texas. Although the Andersons weren't avid hunters, they did occasionally practice shooting. Following Mark's directions, the police found and seized over 10 different types of pistols, rifles, and revolvers from the house. With no clear motives or suspects, the police explored the possibility of criminal gang involvement, but they quickly dismissed it. Their informants also didn't provide any useful information. 2 days after her death, on September 17, 2010, the police received the autopsy report, which revealed that Amanda had been shot 4 times in the head. What was especially puzzling was that every shot would have been fatal, yet the perpetrator had continued to pull the trigger 3 more times. The unusual location and direction of the bullet wounds on Amanda's head raised suspicions. The attacker used a small-caliber pistol, firing from a distance of at least a yard away, as there were no gunpowder marks around the wounds. 2 wounds were located on top of her head, one near the right temple and one on her forehead, with all shots entering from top to bottom, except for one shot to the right temple that entered at a right angle. This suggested a deliberate and controlled attack, more like an execution. Forensic analysis led investigators to believe that Amanda knew her killer. They based this conclusion on two key facts. Firstly, Amanda was sitting on her bed, occupied with her laptop, when she was shot, indicating that she felt comfortable and safe in the presence of the attacker. Secondly, the fact that the attacker was standing next to her suggests a level of familiarity and intimacy. If Amanda had not known the person, she would likely have reacted or taken action when they entered her room, but she did not, implying that she trusted the perpetrator and did not anticipate the attack. Detectives investigating Amanda's death questioned her college friends, learning she was cautious and avoided strangers, drugs, and criminals. Her best friend confirmed she had no enemies on campus. Despite this, they considered that someone might have secretly targeted her. Reviewing college security footage and reports from the past year, they searched for suspicious incidents but found nothing useful. The police revisited the Anderson family to inquire about Amanda's personal life, suspecting a personal motive behind the brutal crime due to the multiple wounds. Amanda's mother was baffled by the incident, describing her daughter as a kind and diligent student who regularly attended church. Although Amanda didn't have a boyfriend at the time of her death, her mother revealed that she had met someone about a year prior, but their relationship ended. The police sought out this individual to learn more about his connection with Amanda and the reasons behind their breakup. Upon questioning, the man revealed that he and Amanda shared some classes and occasionally went to the movies with friends, but they never developed a romantic relationship. They had gone out together a few times, but it didn't progress further. When asked about the last time he saw Amanda, he stated that it was the day before her murder. The police started their investigation again from the beginning, re-examining all the evidence. They focused on Nate's 911 call, which was the starting point of the case. During the call, Nate claimed he didn't enter his sister's room and that someone had shot Amanda. The investigators realized it was impossible for someone standing in the doorway to know Amanda was shot in the head, or how many times, without entering the room. The police revisited the Anderson house and inspected the door, which Nate said was opened when he got home. Although there were scratches on the door, the lock was intact, leading the police to believe someone was trying to make it look like the door was kicked in. The crime lab analyzed the weapons found in the Anderson house and concluded that one of the pistols was likely the weapon used to shoot Amanda. After a thorough investigation, detectives reached a conclusion. All evidence pointed to a family member as Amanda's killer. The murder weapon, a pistol, was hidden in a secure location, suggesting the killer knew exactly where to find it. Moreover, the killer returned the gun to its hiding place after the crime. On the night of the murder, Amanda's parents had solid alibis. Her father was dining with a friend, and her mother was at work. This left only Amanda and her 15-year-old brother Nate in the house. To find answers, investigators delved deeper into the events of that evening. It turned out that Amanda's father, Mark, had called her to remind her to pick up her mother from work. 12 minutes later, Mark received a call from Nate, who was crying and claimed someone had shot Amanda. However, this call raised a disturbing question. Why did Nate call his father before calling emergency services, unless he was trying to cover his tracks after murdering his own sister? The police required solid proof before making any accusations, as they didn't want to cause further distress to Amanda and Nate's parents. To gather more information, the investigators decided to question Mark Anderson, Nate's father, without directly accusing his son of involvement. During the conversation, Nate's parents became aware that the police suspected their son. When asked about Nate's recent use of the .22 caliber pistol, Mark revealed that he had given the gun to Nate a few days before Amanda's death, and that Nate had fired it in their backyard. The officers went back to the Anderson house and found 22 caliber casings in the backyard that matched the bullets found in Amanda's body. While this was suspicious, it wasn't conclusive evidence. However, 2 weeks later, a crucial clue was found. Nate's clothes, which he wore when he claimed to have found his sister dead, were tested with luminol, revealing traces of blood. Further analysis by a national blood spatter expert suggested that Nate was either in the room when the shooting occurred or was the one who fired the fatal shots. The tests confirmed that his clothes had Amanda's blood on them. Despite this, the Anderson siblings seemed to have a loving relationship. Photos showed them being affectionate, and their parents described them as best friends who often made videos together, including one just days before Amanda's death. The police were left wondering what could have driven Nate to commit such a heinous act. On November 10, 2010, police arrested Nate Anderson at a church, suspecting him of murdering his own sister. The accusation shocked everyone who knew him, as it seemed out of character. The trial began on October 24, 2011, and was an emotionally challenge for the Anderson family. Despite the evidence presented against Nate, his family remains supportive and refuses to believe he is capable of such a crime. According to his grandmother, Dolores Anderson, Nate is a kind and innocent boy who would never harm his sister. His parents, too, are adamant that he is not responsible for Amanda's death. For his mother, Stacy Anderson, the whole ordeal has been a nightmare. She is still adjusting to the loss of her daughter and now has to cope with her son's arrest. Mark expressed his outrage and disbelief at the accusation that his son killed his sister Amanda. The brutality of the crime, including the fact that Amanda was shot 4 times, has led Mark to conclude that Nate could not have committed the crime. Initially, Mark had some doubts about Nate's involvement, but once he learned about the 4 gunshots, he became convinced of his son's innocence. Mark is critical of the authorities, accusing them of ignoring evidence that exonerates Nate and instead focusing on evidence that supports their own case. He feels that they have already made up their minds about Nate's guilt, despite the fact that an expert had recommended that Nate be tried in juvenile court, not adult court. After Amanda's death, investigators found evidence in the Anderson home that shed light on the case. Prosecutors discovered that Nate's computer had a history of visits to adult websites and violent drawings. Furthermore, a text message on Amanda's phone mentioned someone should be shot, but the context indicated it was a joke about Nate not helping with chores and playfully shooting staples at Amanda. An expert testified that this evidence could be a motive for the crime. However, Nate's attorney argued that the evidence was not unusual or incriminating. Ultimately, Nate accepted a plea deal in February 2012 and pleaded guilty to a first-degree crime. He confessed to a psychologist and his parents that he had killed Amanda. In a statement, Nate and Amanda's parents shared Nate's confession. According to Mark Anderson, Nate told him that he shot Amanda with a pistol found in their home and asked for forgiveness, which he granted. Stacy, the mother, expressed the immense difficulty she experienced as a mother who loves both her children. Nate Anderson has been sentenced to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. His attorney believes that agreeing to the plea deal was in Nate's best interest, as neither Nate nor his family wanted the case to go to trial. Regarding the motive behind the crime, Nate's attorneys declined to provide details, saying only that they know what happened and are choosing not to discuss it further. However, they did reveal that Nate has shown remorse for his actions, has asked for forgiveness, and has received it. The attorneys described the process of coming to terms with what happened as difficult and emotional. The authorities have determined that the incident was a hate crime, as there was no evidence of any other trauma. According to the Smith County Sheriff's Office, Nate will be eligible to apply for parole in 2 years. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kathy Martin. Kathy Martin was born on October 25, 1959, in Houston, Texas, and grew up in a loving family where she was especially close to her sister. In high school, she met Mike, and a few years later, they tied the knot. The couple settled in a quiet Houston suburb where they soon started a family with the birth of their daughter. 3 years later, Kathy became pregnant again, and in early 1987, they welcomed a son. At just 27 years old, Kathy was now a mother of 2. After her second child was born, Kathy dedicated herself to full-time motherhood, focusing on raising her children. Mike worked at his father-in-law's small sign factory, providing a stable income for the family. Kathy's parents also offered financial support, enabling her to devote all her time to the kids. On March 3, 1987, Kathy was at home with the children as usual, while Mike was at work. After his shift ended, he decided to meet up with friends and headed to a bar. Mike attempted to call his wife from a payphone, but she didn't answer, a rare occurrence, as Kathy rarely had the chance to leave the house even for a few minutes. Mike tried calling her several more times, but still got no response. Worried, Mike called their neighbor, Tim, and asked him to check on Kathy. Tim went to their house and knocked on the door, but received no answer. Peering through the living room window, he noticed the TV was on, so he persisted in knocking, but there was only silence. Tim's concern grew that something might have happened to Kathy. Rather than returning home to call Mike or the police, he got in his car and drove around town searching for patrol officers. After a few minutes of driving, he spotted a police car and explained the situation to the officers, requesting they check on Kathy. When the police arrived at the house and received no response to their knock, they tried the door handle and found it unlocked. Upon entering the house, they immediately found Kathy's daughter lying on the living room sofa, unconscious and displaying visible signs of trauma, but still alive. The officers quickly called for an ambulance and continued to inspect the other rooms. In the bedroom, the officers found the younger child in his crib, safe and unharmed. However, in another room, they were met with a gruesome scene. Kathy lay on the floor, bloodied and lifeless. She was naked, and the police quickly determined that she was the victim of a heinous crime. Her hands were bound with a lamp cord, a disturbing indicator of the brutality she had endured. The paramedics rushed Kathy's daughter to the hospital, and the investigators began meticulously examining the crime scene. Kathy's father arrived shortly after, but the police withheld the details of the tragedy from him. Instead, they requested that he go to the hospital to be with his granddaughter when she awoke. As Kathy's father waited at the hospital, he was shocked to learn about his daughter's murder from a news report on TV. Meanwhile, Mike arrived at the house, and the police were immediately struck by his suspicious behavior. Not only did he show up late, but there were also telltale bloodstains on his shirt. The police asked him to surrender his clothes and answer their questions, their scrutiny intensifying with each passing moment. Investigators made several intriguing discoveries. Firstly, they found numerous bloodstains in the bathroom, indicating that the perpetrator had attempted to clean up the crime scene. This suggested that the attacker had lingered in the house for some time rather than fleeing immediately after the murder. Secondly, forensic experts detected no signs of forced entry. All windows and doors, except the front door, were locked, implying that Kathy either let the attacker in voluntarily or they had a key. The police also observed another peculiar detail. All of Kathy's clothes were neatly folded on the floor beside her body. This not only hinted at the possibility of sexual assault, but also seemed strange that the attacker had taken the time to fold her clothes with such care. The detectives hypothesized that the assailant might have threatened to harm her children if she screamed or refused to comply with their demands. Kathy may have acquiesced to their demands solely to protect her children, only to be killed afterwards. Kathy's daughter was fighting for her life after being brutally beaten, likely with bare hands. After several hours in the hospital, she fell into a coma, and her chances of survival remained dire. Medical experts examined Kathy's body and determined that she had suffered 16 stab wounds, primarily in the abdominal area. They also confirmed that she had been sexually assaulted and managed to extract biological material from the perpetrator. However, during that time, DNA analysis was not yet widely used in forensic science, so the experts could only determine the perpetrator's blood type. From the early hours of the investigation, the police zeroed in on the victim's husband, Mike, after noticing suspicious stains on his shirt. They seized his clothing for examination, and Mike's behavior that evening also raised eyebrows. After work, he went out with friends, but instead of going home, he asked a neighbor, Tim, to check on his wife, a tactic detectives had seen before where a husband committed the murder and created an alibi. The police also uncovered that Mike had a checkered past. Right after high school, he was arrested for selling drugs to an undercover cop and was sentenced to 6 years in prison, although he only served 2 before being released on parole. Later, he married Kathy, but the police needed more evidence to charge him. The detectives also launched an investigation into Tim, the neighbor, whose behavior seemed suspicious. Rather than calling the police from his home, he drove around town searching for patrol officers. A search of Tim's car revealed suspicious stains on the floor mats that resembled blood. Forensic experts determined that Kathy's death had occurred around 10 p.m., approximately 6 hours before her body was discovered. This led the detectives to probe the suspect's whereabouts long before the evening and their actions after the murder. Both Mike and Tim claimed to have been at work, prompting the police to verify their alibis. 2 days after the murder, the hospital contacted the detectives with a breakthrough. Kathy's daughter had suddenly regained consciousness, and her life was no longer in danger. Investigators rushed to interview her, hoping she could provide insight into the events, but the 4-year-old girl had almost completely lost her memory of that day. She vaguely recalled a man with light hair entering their house, though both her father and Tim had dark hair. The detectives received an unexpected update from the lab, forcing them to reassess the case. The experts' analysis revealed that the stains on the neighbor's car mats were mere machine oil, and those on the husband's shirt were just paint. Furthermore, multiple colleagues of Mike and Tim, who worked in different fields, corroborated that the 2 men had been at their workplaces all day and hadn't left until evening. This eliminated both men as suspects, as they hadn't had the opportunity to commit the crime at Kathy's house. The police, who had been convinced of one of the suspects' involvement, found themselves back at the starting point. They refocused on other potential suspects familiar with the victim and capable of entering her house without raising suspicions. As detectives questioned Kathy's relatives and friends, asking who they thought might be responsible, they discovered an intriguing pattern. Many of them, without hesitation, named one person, Greg. Greg, Kathy's brother-in-law, was flagged as a suspect due to his troublesome behavior, which her loved ones revealed she had frequently complained about. According to Kathy, Greg would openly flirt with her and persistently try to persuade her into intimate encounters. Moreover, he would often make inappropriate remarks about her stomach, a detail that aligned with the majority of stab wounds being located in that area. The police investigation uncovered Greg's history of illegal substance abuse and criminal past, prompting detectives to focus on him. They soon found a promising lead, a fingerprint and hair at Kathy's house matching Greg's. However, this evidence was not conclusive, as Greg regularly visited Kathy and her husband, potentially leaving behind the prints and hair prior to the murder. Kathy's parents were convinced of Greg's guilt. Her mother shared a telling anecdote. During a late-night hospital visit with her granddaughter, Greg appeared, causing the girl to glance at her grandmother with an unmistakable look of fear. After hearing this testimony, the detectives summoned Greg for questioning. He categorically denied any involvement in the murder, claiming to have been with a friend at the time, a friend with a notable criminal record. Mid-interrogation, Greg requested a brief absence to pay for additional parking time, allegedly to avoid a ticket, but he never returned to the station. Greg's wife's sister later recounted that on the day of the murder, Greg dropped her off at work around 10:30 a.m. and picked her up at 2:30 p.m., leaving him a 4-hour window that coincided with the time of the murder, providing a plausible opportunity to kill Kathy. Despite these suspicious circumstances, the police still lacked concrete evidence to link Greg to the crime. As a last resort, they decided to analyze the semen sample taken from the victim's body. At the time, forensic experts could only determine the blood type of the sample's owner. The blood type of the sample from Kathy's body matched Greg's, but this finding did not conclusively prove his guilt. Investigators were unable to make an arrest based on the available evidence, prompting a continued search for additional proof. However, despite their efforts, they were ultimately unable to prove Greg's involvement. The case eventually stalled, leaving Kathy's family frustrated and convinced of Greg's guilt, yet powerless to act. Meanwhile, Shelley, Kathy's sister, refused to accept that her husband was capable of such a heinous crime and chose to continue living with him in the years that followed. Detectives revisited the case in 1998, 11 years after the murder, seeking DNA analysis on the remaining semen sample. However, they only got a partial DNA profile, which showed Greg belonged to the 2% of the population matching it. When questioned, Greg changed his story, claiming a consensual relationship with Kathy, but detectives were skeptical, knowing such shifts are common in murder cases. Despite suspicions, they couldn't convict without a full DNA match, and the case went cold again. In 2002, detectives revived the investigation, enlisting the expertise of forensic scientist Catherine Long, a pioneer in DNA research. She and her team aimed to determine whether a perpetrator's DNA could linger on the victim's body after strangulation, and if so, whether it could be extracted for analysis. To test this theory, Catherine and her colleagues simulated strangulation, squeezing each other's necks, and then collected samples from their hands and the neck area. The results were striking. Even brief contact left behind sufficient skin particles for DNA analysis. Detectives re-examined Kathy's case, focusing on the lamp cord used to bind her hands. Since only the killer could have tightened it, they handed it over to Catherine for DNA analysis. Stored in a paper bag, the cord was swabbed from end to end, including blood-stained areas. 2 DNA profiles emerged, Kathy's and Greg's, providing strong evidence that Greg was the killer. 15 years after the murder, the suspect was arrested and denied involvement, claiming a romantic relationship with Kathy. However, DNA evidence led to his trial. While in prison, his cellmate reported that Greg confessed to the crime, boasting about killing Kathy after she resisted his advances and threatening to harm her son if she didn't comply. The detectives were convinced of the cellmate's veracity, given that he couldn't have possibly divined so many crucial details, even if he had carefully read about the case in the news. Empowered by the cellmate's testimony, the detectives confronted Greg, and this time, he finally broke down and confessed. He acknowledged his guilt in Kathy's murder, repeating the same admission he had made to his cellmate. Subsequently, he pleaded guilty in court and was handed a 45-year prison sentence, though he ultimately served only 4 years before succumbing to liver cancer at the age of 56. Kathy's husband, Mike, tragically didn't live to see the day of the killer's arrest, passing away at the age of 45. Her children and parents expressed gratitude to the detectives for finally bringing the case to a close, albeit 15 years later. Throughout that long and arduous wait, they had been almost certain that Greg was the perpetrator, yet they were forced to watch him continue living with their second daughter, powerless to intervene. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sarah Ann Wood. Sarah Ann Wood was born on March 4, 1981 in New York. Raised in a devout family, her father served as a pastor in a small town in the state's middle. From a young age, Sarah, along with her older sister and brother, attended services at her father's church and Sunday school. Dancing was her passion, poetry brought her joy, and she was an enthusiastic member of her school's cheerleading team. Sarah loved nothing more than riding her bike, often using it to get to her father's church, less than a mile from home, for services, Sunday school, or to lend her father a hand. On August 18, 1993, when Sarah was 12, she rode her bike to church for Sunday school, following her usual routine. With her father staying home, the classes were conducted by other church members. Her parents expected her to return immediately after the classes, but as time passed and she failed to appear, they grew increasingly anxious. After waiting a little longer, they headed to the church, thinking Sarah might have lingered behind with friends, but she was nowhere to be found. The Sunday school teachers reported that she had departed on her bike soon after classes, taking with her a few books, some colorful folders, and a small display board. Her parents' concern escalated because the ride home from church should have taken only a few minutes, and it was unlikely Sarah would have gone elsewhere with all those items. Moreover, she always sought permission before deviating from her routine. Her parents retraced the route to the church, inquiring with neighbors if anyone had seen their daughter, leveraging the small town's familiarity and Sarah's father's church connections. Dozens of people quickly joined the search, and they soon found a witness who had seen Sarah riding towards her house around 2:30 p.m., just a few hundred yards from her home. This sighting only intensified her parents' anxiety, convinced that something had indeed happened to Sarah, prompting them to contact the police. The local police department swiftly launched a search operation, deploying dozens of officers to scour the area. The sheriff also requested assistance from the fire department, and they joined forces to aid in the search. News of Sarah's disappearance spread rapidly throughout the community, prompting dozens of volunteers to join the effort. Within the first few hours, several hundred people were involved in the search. The police concentrated on the route from the church to Sarah's home, meticulously searching the fields and woods on both sides of the road. Their efforts soon yielded a disturbing discovery. Just a few yards into the woods, they found Sarah's bike leaning against a tree. The police centered their focus on that area and quickly uncovered the items Sarah had brought from Sunday school, hidden beneath a nearby bush. These findings led investigators to a grim inference. It was likely that Sarah had been abducted. They theorized that an unknown assailant might have dragged her from the road into the woods, left her belongings behind, and then taken her away in a vehicle. The police department launched an all-out search effort, pouring all its resources into finding Sarah. Meanwhile, her restless relatives took matters into their own hands, printing flyers with details of her disappearance and distributing them not only in their hometown, but also in surrounding cities, with the help of dozens of volunteers. Despite their collective efforts, the first day's search yielded nothing. Police and volunteers scoured the area within a several-mile radius of the road until nightfall, but no new leads emerged. The search resumed the next morning, with even more people joining the effort. The state police also joined the investigation, focusing on identifying a potential suspect. Investigators questioned every resident in town, hoping someone might have spotted a suspicious stranger or vehicle linked to Sarah's disappearance. Sarah's parents set up an improvised headquarters, manned by dozens of volunteers, who printed and distributed flyers, scouring for witnesses or leads that could bring them closer to finding Sarah. As local media picked up the story, news of her disappearance spread nationwide within days. The police received over 1,000 tips, meticulously investigating each one, but repeatedly hit dead ends. Concerned residents helped the parents raise a substantial $150,000 reward for any information about Sarah's whereabouts. But unfortunately, this too yielded nothing. The active phase of the search continued for about a week, before the police concluded they were unlikely to find valuable leads in the area. They shifted their focus to finding a potential suspect, scrutinizing local residents and convicted criminals from neighboring towns, but to no avail. Sarah's disappearance was featured on 2 popular national television shows, triggering a new wave of tips. Her parents made regular appeals to the public through the media, pleading for any information about their daughter's whereabouts, but her fate remained a mystery. This continued for nearly 6 months until a surprising breakthrough occurred. On the morning of January 7, 1994, 12-year-old Rebecca left her home in a small Massachusetts town and set out on her walk to school. As she strolled down a deserted street, she noticed a man walking alongside her. He attempted to speak, but Rebecca couldn't hear him due to her headphones. When she removed them, the man brandished a gun and warned her that if she obeyed his every command, he wouldn't harm her. He grasped her jacket, and they continued walking in the same direction. Rebecca was terrified to scream or attempt to flee, aware that even if she complied, the man might still kill her. As they walked, she quickly devised a plan. Feigning an asthma attack, she struggled to breathe and sat down on the ground. The man released her jacket, instead gripping the edge of her backpack as she continued to act as if she were suffocating. Seizing the moment, Rebecca slipped out of the backpack straps and sprinted away from her kidnapper. A few hundred yards away, she spotted several adults and rushed towards them, exclaiming that someone had just attempted to abduct her. Meanwhile, the kidnapper sped away in his car, taking Rebecca's backpack with him. One of the witnesses took it upon himself to tail the kidnapper in his own vehicle. After a few minutes, the witness pulled over at the nearest gas station and alerted the police. The witness was able to provide a partial license plate number and the car's model, while Rebecca gave a detailed description of the kidnapper's appearance. The police promptly launched a search for the vehicle, scouring databases for matching cars. They also sent out alerts to neighboring towns, and their efforts were rewarded that very evening. A patrol officer driving through a nearby small town spotted a vehicle matching the description. He pulled over and knocked on the door of the house where it was parked. Inside, he found several people, and upon inquiring about the pickup truck, the owner explained that he hadn't driven it in a while due to his loss of sight. He revealed that his neighbor, 43-year-old Louis Lint, frequently borrowed the truck. Louis, a handyman, assisted his blind neighbor with various household tasks in exchange for using the pickup truck. According to Louis, he last drove the truck the previous day and hadn't used it since. Nonetheless, the officer asked him to come to the station for questioning, and Louis complied. Despite his earlier denial, Louis continued to insist that he hadn't used the pickup that day and had no involvement in the attempted abduction. He claimed to be a devout Christian who spent most of his free time at church and would never engage in such an act. While Louis was at the station, the police took his photograph and presented it to Rebecca and other witnesses in a photo lineup alongside pictures of other men. Unanimously, they identified Louis as the kidnapper. Investigators promptly obtained a warrant to search Louis's house and the vehicles, including the pickup truck owned by his neighbor. Their search yielded a disturbing discovery: a small bag containing duct tape, a knife, children's sunglasses, and candy in Louis's van, which was parked near their house. Additionally, the police found a gun and Rebecca's backpack inside the house. Investigators uncovered a shocking discovery: a large, secret room dug out beneath the house, still under construction. With this substantial evidence, the police arrested Louis for the attempted abduction. Initially, he maintained his innocence, but soon decided to confess to everything. He admitted to traveling to Rebecca's town in search of a victim, bringing along his kidnapping bag that he always kept in his car. Louis then explained the purpose of the secret room he was digging under his house, and his story left even the police stunned. He revealed that he planned to convert it into a fully equipped bunker where he intended to hold kidnapped victims captive. Louis confessed to aiming to abduct 11 girls between the ages of 12 and 17 to satisfy his horrific fantasies. He added that until the room was completed, he didn't plan to keep his victims there for long, intending to kill them within a few days. In Lewis's house, the police also found a list of several names. Upon identifying these individuals, they realized they were all children living in close proximity to Lewis's home. Following his confession, Lewis was placed in jail awaiting trial for attempted abduction. Investigators continued to visit him to gather additional information, and during one of these visits, he unexpectedly confessed to another crime. Lewis revealed that 4 years prior, in October 1990, he was working as a janitor at a movie theater in the same town where he later attempted to kidnap Rebecca. On the evening of October 22nd, he left work and spotted 12-year-old James Bernardo riding his bike near the parking lot. Lewis instantly decided to abduct him, intending to assault him. Lewis offered James $5 to help set up chairs in the movie theater, and the boy agreed. Lewis led him to the empty theater where he bound him. He then drove his van closer to the entrance, dragged the boy and his bike inside, and took him to his home. He left the boy there and drove to a nearby lake to dispose of the bike by throwing it into the water. Lewis returned home and attempted to assault the boy, but was unsuccessful. Frustrated, he decided to dispose of the victim. He dragged him into his van and drove to a neighboring state, where he murdered the boy and left the body in the forest. A hunter soon discovered the body and reported it to the police. However, despite their efforts, detectives were unable to identify the culprit over the course of several years. Now, upon comparing Lewis's statement with the case materials, investigators discovered that he had provided an astonishing number of facts and details about the crime that perfectly mirrored reality. Following Lewis's confession, news of his case spread like wildfire throughout the country. Within just a few days, police realized they were dealing with a man who not only had attempted to abduct a girl and was building a secret bunker for other victims, but had also confessed to a murder that no one had suspected him of. New York investigators searching for Sarah Wood soon caught wind of Lewis's case. They delved into the details of Rebecca's attempted abduction and requested more information about Lewis himself. Interestingly, profilers had previously created a profile of Sarah's potential abductor, and Lewis seemed to fit it remarkably well. The investigators decided to pay him a visit and headed to the prison. During the interrogation, he revealed that frequent visits to the neighboring state were motivated by close family ties. Lewis also admitted that he would often drive through small towns in search of victims, and on August 18, 1993, he spotted Sarah walking along the road with her bike. According to his statement, he pulled up beside her, got out of the car, and forced her into the van at gunpoint. He then tied her up, dragged her belongings and bike into the nearby woods to conceal them, and drove her hundreds of miles to the mountains. In a remote area by a large lake, he assaulted and killed her, eventually burying her body in a hole. The police launched an extensive search effort around the lake, mobilizing hundreds of volunteers, park rangers, and the military. However, the vast size of the lake posed a significant challenge, making it nearly impossible to cover the entire area, even with such a large search team. Furthermore, with months having passed since the burial, the location could have become overgrown with vegetation. After weeks of searching, they were unable to find either the body or any evidence. Detailed testimony with precise details of the abduction was sufficient to charge Lewis with the murders of both Sarah and 12-year-old James. In January 1995, Lewis was sentenced to 17 to 20 years in prison for the attempted abduction of Rebecca. The following June, the trial for James's murder began, and Lewis pleaded guilty before the judge. He confided in his lawyer that he wanted to confess to Sarah's murder immediately, but when he entered the courtroom and saw her parents, he abruptly changed his mind. However, just 9 days later, when he was brought into an empty courtroom, he finally admitted his guilt. Despite this, he persisted in refusing to disclose the burial site, ignoring the desperate pleas from Sarah's parents. The prosecution offered Lewis a deal in exchange for information about Sarah's whereabouts. In return, they promised to serve his sentence in a state prison instead of a federal prison, as Lewis had requested. He agreed and began collaborating with investigators. Lewis identified a specific area near the lake and even sketched a rough map. Although the police wanted to take him along on the search, his lawyer cautioned against it. Undeterred, the police organized extensive searches in this area, braving the snow and freezing temperatures, with the help of hundreds of volunteers and heavy equipment. Despite their efforts, they were still unable to find Sarah. Several months later, with autumn's arrival, the police launched another attempt, but it ultimately proved unsuccessful. Throughout this period, detectives endeavored to extract more specific information from Lewis, but he persistently refused to divulge the exact location or assist the police in their search. Eventually, the prosecution opted to revoke the deal, and on April 11, 1997, Lewis was sentenced to 25 years in prison, the maximum sentence the judge could impose without the discovery of the body. The judge added that if such evidence were available, he would have certainly handed down a death sentence. During the trial, Lewis's lawyer attempted to mitigate the punishment in all three cases without disputing his client's guilt. He argued that Lewis suffered from an unidentified mental disorder, citing claims of hearing voices in his head and alleged protection by aliens. However, experts found no evidence of any mental disease and concluded that Lewis was likely feigning these symptoms to avoid severe punishment. After the verdict, detectives persisted in visiting Lewis in prison, hoping to coax him into revealing Sarah's burial site. His behavior was erratic, and he provided contradictory information, naming different locations. On one occasion, he claimed he wasn't ready to disclose the location because he had buried Sarah alongside another victim, and he didn't want anyone to uncover the identity of this other person. Despite the emotional pleas of Sarah's parents, who also visited Lewis in prison, he remained resolute in his silence. The detectives were also exploring Lewis's potential involvement in other unsolved cases. Having confessed to the abductions of Sarah and James, the police had little doubt that he had additional victims. Almost immediately after his arrest, they uncovered another attempted abduction he had made several years prior. Lewis had tried to grab a girl off the street, but her father intervened, and they reported the incident to the police, although detectives couldn't identify the perpetrator until Lewis's photo appeared in the news. Lewis was also suspected of being involved in 4 unsolved disappearances between 1985 and 1992, and investigators concluded that he had the capability to commit these crimes, but no evidence was found, and Lewis refused to confess. Despite this, his story didn't end there. Detectives continued to visit him after his sentencing, hoping he would reveal Sarah's whereabouts or confess to other crimes. However, it wasn't until 2013 that Lewis suddenly had a change of heart and confessed to another murder. He admitted to being responsible for one of the crimes he was suspected of. According to Lewis, on November 6, 1992, he abducted a 16-year-old teenager with developmental disabilities who was riding a bike to his grandmother's house. He claimed to have forced the boy into his van, then killed him and dumped his body in a lake. Investigators confirmed his involvement based on his detailed description of the events, although official charges in the case have yet to be filed against him to this day. Currently, Lewis is 73 years old and remains incarcerated for 2 murders and an attempted abduction. Sarah's parents hold on to the hope that they will eventually persuade him to reveal the location of her burial site, or that he will divulge this secret before his death. In memory of Sarah, her relatives also organize an annual bike ride. Initially attended by just a few people, the event has grown steadily, with several thousand participants now regularly taking part. This event also helps raise significant funds to support efforts to locate missing children. The police are determined to find Sarah's burial site and are not giving up, even if Lewis is not willing to help them. They will keep searching the areas he has pointed out until they locate her body. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Chris Coleman. On May 5, 2009, the Coleman family, who appeared to have the perfect life, was tragically murdered in their home just before 3 a.m. Let's examine the events of that night, a crime that left a lasting impact on many. Chris Coleman met his future wife, Sherry, while they were both serving in the military. For Sherry, it was love at first sight, and she knew immediately that Chris was the one she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. Within a few months of meeting, Sherry became pregnant with their first child, Garrett. As devout Christians, the couple married before Garrett was born. After Garrett's birth, Chris and Sherry had their second son, Gavin. Gavin was a lively child, whereas Garrett was more laid back, like his father. Both boys had lively personalities and were well behaved. Sherry was a devoted mother who would do anything to protect her sons. Chris was an excellent father, and the family enjoyed quality time together, laughing, playing, and cherishing every moment with their children. After leaving the military, the Colemans moved to Waterloo, Illinois, a small town, where they bought a house in an upscale neighborhood, courtesy of Chris's new job. Chris became the head of security for Joyce Meyer, a renowned TV evangelist and CEO of one of the world's largest Christian ministries. However, controversy arose due to Joyce's multi-million-dollar income and opulent lifestyle, which sparked criticism from some individuals. They accused her of being a greedy con artist who exploited her followers' fears, arguing that her financial success and lavish lifestyle conflicted with her religious teachings. As Joyce's bodyguard and personal security guard, Chris was responsible for monitoring and protecting her from hate mail and letters sent to her church, which often contained threats against her life, with people expressing their intentions to harm her. Chris earned a substantial salary of $100,000 per year working for Joyce's ministry in St. Louis, Missouri, providing financial stability for his family. As part of his job as a bodyguard, Chris frequently accompanied Joyce on international trips, ensuring his safety while abroad. However, this arrangement meant Chris was away from home for extended periods, affecting his family life. One year, Chris was gone for 260 days, which took a toll on his family, especially his sons, Garrett and Gavin. The boys missed their father and would mark off each day on a calendar, eagerly waiting for his return. However, shortly after Chris came home, he would have to leave again, causing tension in his marriage to Sherry. Sherry felt overwhelmed, shouldering the responsibilities of both parents and underappreciated for managing the household alone. The constant cycle of Chris's absence strained their relationship. In October 2008, Chris visited Tampa, Florida, where his friend Sherry had gone to high school. Sherry got in touch with her old friend Tara Lintz and asked her to look out for Chris while he was in town. After settling in, Chris contacted Tara and they agreed to meet up. Tara kindly showed Chris around the city. On November 14, 2008, at around 11 p.m., Chris received a disturbing email. The sender's email address was destroychris@gmail.com, and the subject line and content terrified him. The email warned Chris to stop working for Joyce Meyer, otherwise he or his family would be killed. Over the next few hours, more threatening emails arrived at the ministry from the same sender, repeating the threat and specifying a time and date when the attack on his family might happen. The sender seemed to know Chris's schedule and was aware that he would soon be traveling out of the country. Chris told Sherry about the threatening emails he'd been getting, and on the following Monday, he went to the local police station to report them. He explained that he'd been away from home a lot lately because he'd been traveling with Joyce Meyer Ministries. The police offered to increase their patrols around the house when Chris was away. But even with the extra police presence, Sherry was still afraid for her family's safety. Sherry was so scared that she once asked a friend to stay with her because she didn't feel safe staying alone in the house when Chris was away. She made it clear that she would do whatever it took to keep her family safe. To prove how serious she was, Sherry showed her friend that she had a gun and demonstrated how to hold it, just in case someone broke into the house while Chris was away and she wasn't there. 2 months after the death threats started, a mysterious hand-delivered letter arrived in the Coleman's mailbox. The letter was written in bold letters and was very demanding. It said, "Deny your God publicly or else. No more opportunities. Time is running out for you and your family." This threat was very ominous and specific, stating that if the Colemans didn't do what the writer wanted, they would face severe consequences. Sherry was deeply shaken by the disturbing message. The fact that someone had invaded her private space and threatened her and her family made her feel genuinely terrified throughout the ordeal. Sherry's fear grew more intense by the day. The letter she received was a constant reminder of the potential danger that lurked in the shadows, waiting to pounce. After getting a death threat in the mail, Sherry and her husband Chris decided to take extra measures to protect their family. As part of their safety plan, Chris installed surveillance cameras around their home. These cameras recorded the surroundings and sent the footage to a screen in their basement office. The footage was also saved on a digital video recorder, allowing Chris to keep a permanent record of any incidents. He hoped the cameras would help him identify the person behind the threats against their family. After the cameras were installed, the threats against the Colemans stopped. Life returned to normal for Chris, Sherry, and their sons, Garrett and Gavin. For a while, everything seemed fine. In April 2009, Sherry confided in others that she was feeling more optimistic about her marriage and was determined to make it work. She was relieved the death threats had stopped and felt a sense of happiness. However, Sherry's optimism was short-lived. A second ominous letter arrived at the Coleman home, warning her that her worst fears were about to become a reality. Chris, her husband, was unsettled by the letter's contents and decided to review the previous night's footage from their security camera. What he saw shocked him. A mysterious silhouette caught his attention, but its identity remained unclear. This new discovery reignited Sherry's fear for her own and her children's safety, plunging her back into a state of constant unease. The brief sense of security she had felt was now gone, replaced by the feeling that her worst nightmare was closing in. The local police boosted their efforts due to the rising threats against the Coleman family. A neighbor, Detective Sergeant Justin Barlow from the Columbia Police Department, took a keen interest in the case. Detective Barlow personally called Chris to discuss the situation. During their conversation, Detective Barlow mentioned that he had noticed Chris's recent work absences from home. He offered help, providing his cell phone number in case Chris needed anything or had concerns. Detective Barlow reassured Chris that he could respond faster in an emergency than the regular police. Detective Justin Barlow lived across the street from the Coleman family, so he set up video cameras to monitor their driveway over several weeks. Although the cameras captured footage of the Colemans going about their daily routines, they did not capture the person responsible for leaving the death threats. Despite his efforts, the videos did not provide any clues or information about the identity of the person behind the threatening messages. On May 5, 2009, Chris went to the gym at 5:45 a.m. After leaving his house around 5:30 a.m., he called his home phone at 6:45 a.m. to check if his wife Sherry and their sons were up and getting ready for school. When no one answered, Chris became worried and called his neighbor, Detective Justin Barlow, at 6:45 a.m. to ask for his help. Chris explained to Detective Barlow that he had been trying to reach Sherry while he was at the gym, but she wasn't picking up. This made Chris increasingly concerned, so he asked Detective Barlow to check on Sherry and the boys. Detective Barlow prepared himself by grabbing his essential items, including his weapon, handcuffs, flashlight, and radio before heading to the Coleman residence. While waiting for backup to arrive, his main goal was to make contact with Sherry and ensure everything was okay. With a mix of anticipation and apprehension, Detective Barlow approached the door and knocked firmly, hoping to get a response. However, the silence that followed made him feel uneasy. The lights inside the house were off, and there was no sign of movement, which only added to his bad feeling. Within minutes of Detective Justin Barlow's arrival at the Coleman home, a patrol vehicle pulled up with an additional officer to assist him. The second officer was sent to the rear of the house to try to see through a door or window or establish contact with Sherry or the boys at the back of the house. But as soon as the officer reached the back, he found signs of forced entry into the basement. This discovery immediately grabbed Detective Barlow's attention, and he began to suspect that someone inside the house was in danger. Detective Barlow was deeply concerned for the safety of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin after discovering the signs of forced entry into the Coleman home. Detective Barlow and the second officer decided to enter the premises through the basement. They announced their presence, but received no response. As they thoroughly searched the basement, they found a disconnected video cable at the computer desk. This led them to conclude that the camera's digital video recorder had been taken. Detective Justin Barlow and another officer made their way up from the basement of the Coleman home, ascending the stairs to the main level. As they climbed, they noticed an increasingly strong smell of aerosol spray paint. Once they reached the top, they saw that the wall had been spray painted with derogatory messages targeting Chris, Sherry, and their sons. 13 minutes after Chris phoned Detective Justin Barlow, Chris returned home from the gym. The detective told him to wait outside while they searched the house. Chris complied, sitting quietly on the porch without asking questions or trying to enter. Meanwhile, a third officer arrived at the Coleman residence. The three officers knew they had to search the rest of the house for Sherry and her sons. As they went upstairs, they found more hate-filled messages spray-painted on the walls when they reached the second story of the Coleman home. Detective Justin Barlow entered Garrett's bedroom, the oldest son's room, and initially thought he was asleep. But when he got closer, the detective realized Garrett was dead. There were no signs of life, and his body was cold to the touch. Ligature marks around his neck indicated the young boy had been murdered by strangulation. The discovery of Garrett's lifeless body shocked Detective Barlow. In the next room, the second officer found Gavin, but to his horror, the boy was also dead, just like his brother. Gavin also had ligature marks around his neck, indicating he had been strangled. The killer had even spray-painted an obscene message on the bed sheets, making the scene even more horrific. The third officer entered the master bedroom, where he was met with a deeply disturbing scene. Sherry, like her sons, was lying lifeless across the bed, her hair scattered over her face, hiding her features. It was obvious to the officer that Sherry had been brutally murdered. As he surveyed the room, he noticed multiple bruises on Sherry's body, suggesting that she had fiercely resisted her attacker, fighting to defend herself and her sons. After Detective Justin Barlow and the officers discovered the lifeless bodies of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin, Chris entered the house, having waited outside for news about his family. Unaware of the gravity of the situation, Chris announced his presence. Detective Barlow then had the heartbreaking task of informing Chris that his entire family had been murdered. This devastating news crushed Chris, leaving him reeling. To give Chris some privacy to process the information, Detective Barlow accompanied him outside. However, as the reality of the situation set in, Chris's reaction was overwhelming. He became nauseous, and his body seemed to weaken. Overcome with grief, Chris curled up in a fetal position, unable to contain the torrent of emotions. The shock of the tragedy was too much for him to absorb. Chris couldn't comprehend the brutal way his family had been taken from him. In desperation, Chris reached out to his father, Ronald, and informed him that something had happened to Sherry and the boys. Ronald immediately realized Chris was in shock upon receiving the news. Ronald was equally stunned, unable to believe that this tragedy had befallen his family. News of the shocking murders of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin Coleman spread swiftly throughout Waterloo, Illinois, where the family lived. As the community awoke to the grim news, neighbors were left devastated and terrified. The Coleman family had always been perceived as the epitome of a perfect American family, with their charming sons, Garrett and Gavin, admired by everyone. In fact, one neighbor went so far as to say that everyone would want their children to be like Garrett and Gavin, who were always polite, helpful, and kind-hearted. For Sherry's brother and mother, the harsh reality of the brutal crime was impossible to accept. Chris Coleman, the husband and father, was taken to a nearby police station for questioning after his wife and 2 sons were discovered murdered. During the interrogation, Detective Justin Barlow asked Chris if he could shed any light on the killings. Chris expressed deep regret for leaving to go to the gym, leaving Sherry and the boys alone in the home. When Detective Barlow asked Chris if he had any idea who could have committed the murders, Chris claimed he had no idea. However, several aspects of Chris's behavior during the interview raised suspicions with the detective. One of the detective's initial concerns was Chris's lack of curiosity about the circumstances surrounding his wife and son's murder. Given the gravity of the situation, it seemed odd that Chris didn't ask questions about their deaths. Instead, he appeared uninterested in finding out the details. Additionally, the detective noticed that Chris tried to conceal scratches on his arms during the interview. He asked for a blanket, despite the warm room temperature, to hide the injuries. These scratches raised suspicions as the detective knew that Sherry, Chris's wife, had fought for her life. When questioned about the scratches, Chris claimed they resulted from installing a satellite dish the day before. During the police interview, Chris denied having an affair outside of his marriage. However, he admitted to having a close friendship with Tara, a cocktail waitress and high school friend of his wife's who lived in Florida. Chris claimed that his wife wouldn't have approved of their conversations, but he maintained that he had no intention of leaving his wife for Tara. He insisted that he would never consider betraying his family in such a way. A different story unfolded when detectives contacted Tara in Florida. Tara claimed that her relationship with Chris went beyond friendship, alleging a full-blown affair that started in November 2008. She handed over her phone and laptop to the police, which contained convincing evidence of their romance, including emails, explicit photos, and videos they had exchanged. When confronted with Tara's information, Chris confessed to seeing her more frequently than he initially admitted. Further investigation revealed that Chris and Tara had devised a secret meeting system, often coinciding with his work trips for Joyce Meyer. They would secretly meet at these locations, sometimes traveling to exotic destinations like Hawaii to spend time together away from their families. Chris claimed his relationship with Tara wasn't an affair, defining an affair as involving a deeper level of commitment and involvement than they had. However, detectives found contradictory evidence on Tara's phone and computer, including a calendar marked with a wedding to Chris and scheduled vacations, suggesting she believed he would leave his family for her. This evidence raised suspicions, contradicting Chris's assertion that their relationship was casual. Chris's father, Ronald, was shocked by the revelation, but insisted that the affair had no connection to the murders of Chris's wife and son. He described Chris as gentle and non-violent, emphasizing that he showed no signs of aggression. Detectives suspected Chris's affair with Tara was a strong motive for the murders, but their initial investigation found insufficient evidence to press charges. After 6 hours of questioning, Chris was released without charges. Tara was identified as a person of interest in the murders of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin. However, detectives cleared her as a suspect after determining she was in Florida on the morning of May 5, 2009, when the family was killed. The Coleman family murders led to one of the largest murder investigations in Illinois history. A task force of 25 detectives was formed to catch the killer, For 15 consecutive days, they worked 20-hour shifts, bringing in experts to assist with the case. A key focus of the task force was tracing the source of the hate-filled emails sent to Chris Coleman. Every threatening email received by Joyce Meyer Ministries in the past year was carefully analyzed, leading the team to locations across the country. Each person who emailed Joyce Meyer was tracked down and interviewed, but none of the individuals who sent those threats seemed to be responsible for the Coleman family's murder. A computer forensic team was called in to investigate the murders of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin. The detectives wanted to find any digital clues related to the crime, so they began by analyzing the email account, diarist@gmail.com. Their analysis revealed that the email address was created on November 14, 2008, just days before the first email was sent. One of the most significant discoveries made by the team was that the death threats sent to Chris Coleman's family had originated from the same IP address associated with Chris himself. The detectives continued their investigation into the Coleman family's murder by conducting a thorough examination of both the spray-painted messages found at the crime scene and Christopher Coleman's handwriting to gather evidence. They took photographs of the spray-painted messages at the crime scene and collected samples of Christopher Coleman's handwriting. These samples were then sent to a handwriting expert for analysis. After comparing the two samples, the expert concluded that the handwriting matched the spray-painted messages. This finding led the detectives to conclude that Christopher Coleman was the one who wrote the messages on the walls of his home on the day of the murders. A chemical analysis of the spray paint used at the crime scene identified the brand and color as Rust-Oleum Candy Apple Red. Investigators learned that Chris Coleman had bought this exact product at a local hardware store just days before his family was killed. One detective contacted the store manager, who confirmed the purchase and identified the specific product as Rust-Oleum Candy Apple Red spray paint. This crucial discovery linked Chris Coleman to the same type of spray paint found at the murder scene. During the investigation into the Coleman family's murder, the time of death became a crucial factor. Initially, Chris claimed to have left his home around 5:45 a.m. on May 5, 2009, the morning his family was killed. However, the medical examiner's report showed that Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin were killed around 3 a.m., indicating that Chris was at home when his family was murdered. 2 weeks after the bodies were discovered, Chris Coleman was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. The prosecution's argument was that the murders were motivated by greed, selfishness, and narcissism, and that Chris had decided to eliminate his family to start anew. In April 2011, Chris Coleman's trial began, with the state accusing him of murdering his wife, Sherry, and their 2 sons, Garrett and Gavin. The prosecution's case was that Chris had killed his family because he wanted to be with Tara Lynn, but couldn't divorce his wife due to the potential loss of his well-paying job with Joyce Meyer Ministries, which did not condone divorce. Conversely, Chris's defense attorney argued that Chris was innocent and that an intruder had entered the home on May 5, 2009, and committed the murders. Exactly 2 years after the devastating murders of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin, Chris Coleman was finally found guilty of the heinous crime. Although eligible for the death penalty, the judge instead sentenced Chris to life imprisonment without parole. This verdict was influenced by the state of Illinois' recent repeal of the death penalty, which was set to take effect just months after the tragic incident. Sherry's loved ones and friends were resolute in keeping her, Garrett, and Gavin's memories alive and sought to do something meaningful to honor them. They decided to raise funds for victims of domestic violence, a cause that deeply resonated with them. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Zoe Hastings. Zoe Hastings was born on November 20, 1996, in Kansas. She was the eldest of 5 children, with 3 younger sisters and a brother. Zoe was always available to assist her parents in caring for her siblings, willing to cancel any plans if her parents needed a helping hand. Her parents were deeply religious, so the family spent a considerable amount of time at church. At some point, they relocated to Dallas, where Zoe enrolled in a high school that emphasized creativity and the arts. She had a passion for drawing and also enjoyed participating in school theatrical performances. In her spare time, Zoe worked at an art studio in Dallas. She also worked as a lifeguard at a local pool during the summer after graduating from high school. Zoe had the opportunity to attend some of the top universities in the country. However, she chose to postpone her education and dedicate some time to her church. In October 2015, when Zoe was 18 years old, she was preparing to go on a mission trip for her church and was eagerly looking forward to the journey. On Sunday, October 11th, she planned to attend the Sunday service where they would discuss some details of their upcoming trip. Zoe took the family minivan, promised her parents she'd be back for dinner, and left her house around 4:40 p.m. The church was only a few miles away, and the parents expected her to return around 6:30. However, as time passed, Zoe didn't come back for dinner, which was quite unusual. They sent her several messages, but there was no response. They also tried calling her again with no luck. After some time, they started calling her friends and family members, thinking Zoe might have visited someone after the service, but none of them had seen her that evening. Finally, her parents decided to call the church, and they encountered an unexpected turn of events. Zoe never showed up there. The parents became even more worried and decided to contact the police. Such behavior was highly unusual for their daughter, as she always told them where she was going and never disappeared without any explanation. They called 911, but the officers did not come to their house to take a missing person report, so the parents drove to the police station themselves, filed a report, and began searching for their daughter. They retraced the entire route from home to the church several times, but couldn't find any trace of Zoe. This went on almost all night, and as morning approached, her mother suddenly had an idea. She recalled that her daughter had an iPhone tracking app, which gave them access to her location. They discovered that her phone was just a few hundred yards from the church, near a small creek across the road from it. The parents immediately went to that spot, and to their horror, they saw a lot of police cars, as well as an ambulance and emergency services approaching. One of the officers explained to them that there had been a car accident a few hours ago. The police received a call from a person who was walking their dog, and at one point, a man approached them, saying that there had been a car accident near the creek, and a woman was injured. They both ran to the scene, where the witness found this woman in a pool of blood and called 911. Police officers quickly identified the deceased. It was Zoe Hastings. However, they immediately realized that she didn't die as a result of the accident. It was obvious from the first look that she had been a victim of murder. Zoe lay on the ground a few hundred yards from the minivan, which was partially submerged in the creek. There was a lot of blood near her body, and police officers noticed multiple cuts on her neck. Zoe's dress was pulled up, and her underwear was rolled down, leading detectives to assume that the killer likely assaulted her. Zoe's parents tried to approach their daughter, but the officers stopped them, saying they shouldn't witness such a gruesome scene. While investigating the crime scene, officers found several clues. All the minivan doors except the driver's were locked, which could indicate that the perpetrator either drove the vehicle themselves or approached Zoe directly at the scene. A few yards from the creek, near an embankment under the bridge, police found a blood-covered knife, which was likely used as the murder weapon. Zoe's smartphone data assisted the investigators in establishing the timeline of case. The GPS data showed that she arrived at the creek at 5:01 p.m., only 20 minutes after leaving her home, and she was apparently killed within a few minutes of arriving there. The police also discovered that after leaving home, Zoe made one stop. She went to a DVD rental service near her local Walgreens to return a movie. While experts examined the victim's body and all the available evidence, detectives decided to look for potential witnesses who were at the store or nearby at the same time as Zoe. After speaking with dozens of people, they managed to find two potential witnesses. The first witness was Lester Clark, who worked at a tattoo parlor next to the store on that day. Around 4:45 p.m., he went to buy cigarettes and saw a woman near the DVD rental service. Shortly after, Lester saw her returning to the parking lot and approaching a white minivan. She tried to open the door, but at that moment, a man approached her, stopped the door with his hand, and said something to her. After that, the woman got into the car and moved to the passenger seat, and the man got into the driver's seat, and they drove away. Lester said that the woman did indeed resemble Zoe, although he didn't think much of the incident as nothing obviously bad seemed to happen. The second witness was a homeless man named Gary Whitman, who shared a similar story. Around 4:45 p.m., when he was across the street from the parking lot, he saw a woman heading towards the white minivan. Suddenly, a man approached her from behind and prevented her from getting into the car. He then took something out of his pocket and showed it to the woman. After that, she got into the car, moved to the passenger seat, and the man got into the driver's seat and drove away. Gary provided a similar description of the suspect and added that the situation struck him as highly suspicious. He went into the store and asked the clerk to call 911, but it's unclear if the clerk complied with his request, as police found no records of this call. While investigators interviewed witnesses, experts made several discoveries. The forensic pathologist examined the victim's body and found traces of male semen, but the amount was so small that conducting a full DNA analysis was simply impossible. This only confirmed that the perpetrator had sexually assaulted the victim before the murder. Investigators also examined the victim's car and couldn't find any foreign fingerprints on either the doors or the steering wheel. Based on witness statements, the suspect could have driven Zoe away from the store parking lot in her minivan, which caught the detectives off guard. However, they didn't rule out the possibility that the killer may have simply wiped down the steering wheel and door handle after the murder. Several hairs were also found on Zoe's body, but experts couldn't extract a full DNA sample from them as they were too small. However, when they examined the knife found near the crime scene, they finally had a breakthrough. A DNA sample was discovered on it, which was immediately uploaded to the FBI database, and police got a match. The sample belonged to 34-year-old Antonio Cochran, a man with a lengthy criminal history dating back to his teenage years. He had been arrested for thefts, assaults, home invasions, and was also suspected of numerous other crimes. The year before these events, in 2014, a 17-year-old daughter of his girlfriend accused Antonio of sexual assault. According to her, he offered her a ride, but when she was in the car, Antonio took her to a wooded area, threatening to kill her if she tried to escape. There, he assaulted her, and the man was arrested. He claimed they had consensual sex, and the case went to court. However, during the trial, the prosecution couldn't provide enough evidence to prove his guilt, so Antonio was found not guilty. With his DNA found on the knife, police identified Antonio as the prime suspect, and he was arrested. During the interrogation, he repeatedly denied any involvement in the murder, so the detectives focused their efforts on finding more evidence. The experts took a DNA sample from Antonio and tried to compare it with the semen and found on the victim's body. But since both pieces of evidence were too small to extract a full sample, experts decided to try a different type of analysis. They were able to generate an approximate profile and determine if it definitely did not match the chosen DNA. In other words, this method operates on the principle of exclusion, but it does not yield any precise results and cannot be used as a proof of guilt. They compared these partial profiles from the hair and semen with the suspect's DNA and concluded that their similarity couldn't be excluded. Meanwhile, detectives examined Antonio's smartphone and found several interesting text messages. Putting them together, it became clear that on the day of the murder, he was in a very troubled state of mind. At 1:48 a.m., the day before Zoe's death, he texted a friend he lived with, saying he was moving out and he would never see him again. On the next day, at 2:07 p.m., he texted his ex-girlfriend, telling her that his stepmother died, and he mentioned she died right in front of him, and he was finding it difficult to cope with the loss. Over the next hour, Antonio texted another woman twice, stating he had been drinking all night, driving around the city, and crying. These were his final messages before Zoe's death. Later that evening, at 9:30 p.m., he texted his friend again, expressing confusion about what to do with his life and how things had recently taken a turn for the worse. The next day, he sent another message to his ex-girlfriend, saying his life is over and she would soon find out why. Examining his browser search history, detectives found that Antonio had visited local news websites over 30 times before his arrest, specifically checking the crime sections. 5 of those visits were directly related to articles about Zoe's murder. They also noticed that before her death, he rarely visited news sites. Police only found one page in his browsing history related to gang activity. Antonio's smartphone provided the detectives with another lead. Experts obtained GPS data from a cell phone provider and discovered that at 4:34 p.m., his phone connected to a tower covering the area where the store was located. This coincided with the time Zoe was there, but this data wasn't considered strong evidence. It only indicated that his phone was within a few miles of the tower. Nevertheless, it suggested that Antonio arrived in the area just minutes before Zoe left the parking lot. His home was quite far, and throughout the day, his phone had been connected to a different nearby tower. Detectives also learned that Antonio had started a new job at a grocery store just 3 days before the incident. On Monday, the day after the murder, he didn't show up for his shift without giving any explanation. Despite the extensive list of circumstantial evidence against Antonio, the only strong evidence remained the suspect's DNA on the handle of the knife. However, this could have posed a problem, as such evidence alone is often insufficient for a conviction, because merely holding a knife doesn't prove the act of murder. For instance, he could have used the knife under different circumstances, and someone else might have used it to commit the crime. But detectives couldn't find any other evidence, so they decided to proceed with the case and take it to court. The prosecution presented its version of what happened on that day. When Zoe returned to the parking lot to her car, Antonio approached her, pulled out a knife from his pocket, and threatened her to get in the car. He then took the driver's seat himself and drove away. Based on the messages sent by the suspect before the murder, he was in a distressed emotional state due to the death of a relative and had consumed a significant amount of alcohol. According to the investigator's version, he decided to abduct the victim with the intention of assaulting her. He chose Zoe randomly because she happened to be in the parking lot at that moment, and Antonio simply saw an opportunity to commit the crime. Antonio drove to a nearby creek located in a low-lying, tree-surrounded area, making it difficult to see from any direction. There, he forced the victim out of the car, assaulted her, and inflicted 6 stab wounds to her neck. He then got back into the car and attempted to drive it into the creek, possibly to conceal any remaining evidence in the vehicle. However, the car only partially submerged in the water, so Antonio could have wiped the steering wheel and door handle clean of his fingerprints and fled the scene. According to the testimony of the first witness, he saw a man who looked similar returning to the store's parking lot on foot that evening. The defense argued that the majority of the evidence could hardly be considered even circumstantial. For instance, the partial analysis of hair and semen only indicated that Antonio couldn't be excluded as the source of these samples, but didn't conclusively prove his involvement. Regarding the DNA on the knife, the defense seized upon the fact that this evidence alone didn't establish the fact of the murder. According to their version, Antonio could have come into contact with the knife under different circumstances before working at the store, where he had a job at a movie theater and sometimes had to collect various items left behind by visitors, including knives. However, No evidence was found to support this version, and if someone else had taken the knife from the theater and used it to commit the murder, they would have had to somehow avoid erasing Antonio's DNA from the handle, which would have been quite a challenging task. The defense tried to challenge the credibility of the second witness, Gary, who was a homeless man. They found out that he had an arrest warrant for breaking the conditions of his parole. The defense wanted to remove his testimony from the case, but the prosecution disagreed. They said that Gary coming forward willingly despite the arrest warrant showed his desire to help. Gary himself said he just wanted to do the right thing, even though he knew he would be arrested for it. Antonio's lawyers also tried to convince the jury that at the time of Zoe's murder, their client was elsewhere, helping a friend, but no substantial evidence supporting this version was presented. Initially, the prosecution sought the death penalty for Antonio, but during the trial, it became clear that with the available evidence, this would be highly problematic. Therefore, they abandoned these plans. After prolonged deliberation, the jurors eventually found Antonio guilty of murder, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Zoe's parents thanked the investigators and all the participants in the trial for achieving justice for their daughter. Her father also shared that from a young age, he had warned all his children about the dangers the world might pose to them, and he had exerted all his efforts to protect them. But his eldest daughter was abducted just a few hundred yards from their home, and he couldn't do anything to prevent it. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lauren Heike. Life can be unpredictable, filled with both joyous moments and heart-wrenching tragedies. The story of Lauren Heike, 29-year-old from Phoenix, Arizona, serves as a poignant reminder of how fragile our existence can be and how quickly everything can change. Lauren, a beautiful soul with captivating green eyes, had an unwavering faith in the goodness of others. Little did she know that her trust and openness would ultimately lead to her untimely demise. Lauren Heike was born on November 20, 1993, in Seattle, Washington, into a well-off family. Her father, Jeff, owned a plumbing manufacturing business, and her mother, Lana, worked in real estate. She was very close to her older brother, Ryan. Lauren received her secondary education at Central Kitsap High School in Silverdale, Washington. After graduation, she moved to Phoenix and enrolled at the Gary Manuel Leda Institute, where she studied to become a cosmetologist and skincare specialist. Lauren always took great care of herself and had a good understanding of cosmetics, so her education helped her develop her natural inclinations. She began her career at the age of 18 and built a successful path. Initially, she worked as a customer support representative for 5 years, starting in 2015. Lauren then became a leading manager at the renowned cosmetics company Benefit before working as a cosmetologist at a beauty salon for 9 months in October 2020. She later got a job as a manager at the Center for Aesthetic Medicine. She also planned to follow in her mother's footsteps and try her hand in the real estate field. At the time of the tragedy, Lauren was working full-time as an instructor at a golf club. She was never afraid of difficulties, was responsible, and easily found common ground with people. She was actively developing in the beauty industry, sports, and real estate. Lauren carefully monitored her physical fitness, regularly engaging in fitness activities, and generally led a healthy, active lifestyle. She had many friends and a supportive family. In addition to working in sports and meeting with friends, she adored traveling and hiking. It was because of the presence of picturesque trails that she loved Phoenix so much. Lauren often walked alone, listening to music and enjoying the fresh air, silence, and tranquility of nature. Her favorite route was a path in the northern part of the city, not far from her apartment, where there was almost never anyone around. Understandably, her parents were very concerned about her solitary walks in deserted places, but Lauren herself was convinced that nothing bad could happen to her. According to her family, Lauren had a kind of routine. She would wake up, drink coffee, chat with loved ones and friends, and then go for a walk. She did this every day because she believed that this way she would start the new day with positivity. Unfortunately, she did not realize that her trusting nature and carefree attitude could cause a fatal role. On April 28, 2023, Lauren's morning began as usual. She drank coffee, talked with family and friends on the phone, and went for her usual walk in the northern district of Phoenix, not far from her own apartment. The route passed through a picturesque trail in a calm, quiet, sparsely populated area, and took 15 to 30 minutes one way. The girl left the house at approximately 10:30 a.m. The last time surveillance cameras recorded her was at 10:52, when Lauren was calmly walking along the trail in the park. She was wearing a pink sports top, black leggings, and sneakers. She only had her phone and keys with her. No one saw her again. Lauren was supposed to show up for work at 11:30, but did not come and did not warn about her delay or absence. This was uncharacteristic for a very responsible girl. Colleagues started calling her, but to no avail. Lauren's phone was turned off. Worried friends began sending messages on social networks and calling each other, hoping that someone knew where Lauren was. But no one could say anything because no one had seen her after she left the house in the morning. Around 1 p.m., Lauren's parents, unable to reach her, arrived at her apartment hoping their daughter was unwell and had not gone to work. However, Lauren was not home, though her belongings were undisturbed and the doors locked. No signs of a break-in or struggle were evident. It appeared she had gone for a walk and not returned. Concerned, her family promptly contacted the police to report her missing. Law enforcement responded swiftly, but initial searches proved futile. The sunny day of April 28th, typical for the area, saw few visitors at the park where Lauren was last seen walking. Had someone been present during the attack, perhaps the tragedy could have been averted, but fate dictated otherwise. As hours passed with no word from Lauren, anxiety mounted among her loved ones. Despite extensive searches of the park and surrounding areas, no clues surfaced. Hoping she had simply wandered off or was delayed, family and friends reached out in vain. The next morning, April 29th, around 11 a.m., the worst fears were realized when a passerby discovered Lauren's body. The woman promptly contacted the authorities, who found Lauren's body, riddled with stab wounds, a short distance from the trail in the undergrowth. She lay face up, arms outstretched, clothes torn, blood everywhere. Forensic experts quickly began their investigation. The medical examiner later determined her death on April 28th around 11 a.m. was due to severe blood loss from 15 deep knife wounds, likely inflicted with a pocket knife. The fatal wound to her back suggested a prolonged attack, evidenced by wounds of varying depth and location on her body. Injuries on her hands indicated a struggle, with deep cuts on both sides as she tried to defend herself from the sharp knife. Despite her resistance, the assailant, aggressive and strong, overpowered her unexpectedly. Scratches on her back and torn clothing suggested a surprise attack from behind, knocking her down and repeatedly stabbing her. A footprint from a size 42 to 43 sneaker at the scene likely belonged to the attacker. Signs of an attempt to escape, crawl away, and hide were visible in the area, but unsuccessful. Traces of blood and remains of a struggle near a barbed wire fence showed her desperate efforts to evade the murderer. Her personal belongings, a phone, and house keys were found nearby. There were no wallet or other valuables on her, so the possibility of robbery was immediately dismissed. Lauren's phone was found to be broken. The last calls were made on the evening of April 27th. As no one had heard from her for over a day, forensic specialists conducted a thorough examination of the territory. They discovered an important detail a few meters from the crime scene. Among the branches lay a bloody pocket knife. Experts immediately suspected this to be the murder weapon. A detailed examination of the blade and handle revealed fingerprints and other DNA traces belonging to an unknown man. Hair and epithelium of the killer were also found at the crime scene. Lauren's body and all physical evidence were promptly sent for examination. Simultaneously, investigators reviewed surveillance camera footage. It was revealed that one of the cameras captured the moment Lauren entered the park at 10:52. She was walking alone, listening to music on her headphones. Nothing suspicious was noted. However, a minute later, the figure of a tall, thin man in dark clothes sprinted past the camera, trying to hide his face. Despite this, experts identified him as a young African-American man in a cap, matching the description of the individual found at the crime scene. Another camera positioned at the park's exit recorded the same man swiftly exiting around the corner at 10:59. He attempted to climb over the fence, but got snagged on his clothes, eventually jumping over and losing his cap. The suspect then disappeared in an unknown direction. These recordings provided the investigation with a crucial lead, offering a detailed description of the person to be located. It's notable that the unknown man's appearance in the park coincided with the time of Lauren's murder. The cameras captured the suspect immediately before and after the crime. A meticulous analysis of the footage showed that the suspect moved purposefully and quickly, appearing vigilant as if afraid of being detected. Secondly, he showed up in the park only 30 to 40 seconds after Lauren, clearly following her. Following the crime, he quickly ran away in the opposite direction from the park's entrance, climbing a fence to disappear rapidly. All of this supports the belief that the murder was planned in advance, indicating it may not have been his first crime. He acted swiftly and boldly, attempting to leave no trace. However, in the panic of the escape, he made some errors that led to him being captured partially on camera. The footage from the cameras was promptly shared with Lauren's relatives, but no one could identify him in the video. The shock and sorrow felt by everyone was palpable. Her relatives couldn't comprehend how someone could brutally take the life of their beloved, gentle girl. Lauren had no enemies, conflicts, valuables, or significant sums of money. Her lifestyle was not hazardous, dispelling notions of revenge or robbery. 1 week after the tragic event, the police held a press conference to share details about the evidence found. They asked the public for help in identifying the suspect. Lauren's father, with tears in his eyes, urged anyone with information to come forward. The family also offered a significant reward for any useful leads. The city was worthy Lauren's story, sparking a huge reaction. Social media was full of sharing information, search efforts, and volunteer work. At the same time, forensic investigations continued. DNA, fingerprints, and other biological evidence were carefully examined in the lab. Finally, experts struck gold. The suspect's genetic profile matched records in the police database. The system revealed the name, Zion William Teasley, a 22-year-old African-American with a history of criminality. Detectives swiftly delved into Zion's background, unearthing his challenging upbringing in a home marred by addiction and criminality since his youth. In 2020, he was convicted of a series of armed robberies. Zion spent almost a year in prison but was released early for good behavior. He was last arrested in January 2023 for a knife attack on a passerby. However, the victim then withdrew the statement, so Teasley got off with a suspended sentence. At the time of Lauren's murder, he was under police supervision and had to regularly check in at the precinct. The last such check took place on April 27th, the day before the tragedy in the park. With this new information, the detectives began to develop a plan to detain the suspect. They established round-the-clock surveillance on him and discovered that Zion was not working anywhere at that time, spending all his time at home and occasionally visiting some dubious individuals. Obtaining an arrest warrant, the capture group went to Zion Teasley's apartment. The door had to be broken down, but no one was inside. During the search, the police found a bucket of chlorine, gloves, and rags, indicating an attempt to destroy evidence, though he didn't have enough time for it. In Zion's room, they found a suitcase stuffed with clothes, a brand new passport in a different name, and bus tickets to Canada, suggesting a plan to flee the country. Investigators immediately suspected that Zion had found out about the search and was trying to evade justice. a large-scale special operation began with the focus on Zion Teasley being sent to all states. Border guards were alerted to apprehend the murder suspect. Patrols were deployed at railway stations, airports, and highways. Detectives traced the fugitive's phone calls and located him using signals from cell towers. Meanwhile, they also collected evidence, including witnesses who saw Zion Teasley following Lauren before her murder. A thorough investigation into Zion's history uncovered previous assaults on women, suggesting a history of violence. He was arrested for harassing a girl in a club. Prior to that, a girl he was dating wrote a statement accusing him of beating her. Although the case was closed due to lack of evidence, Zion was widely regarded as an extremely aggressive and unbalanced person who held contempt for women, considering them inferior. His social media posts were filled with derogatory language towards women, and there were also photos of knives resembling the murder weapon. Police suggested that Lauren might have been a random victim of Zion's violent tendencies. It was theorized that he spotted her on the street, stalked her, and then attacked her in a deserted place. Some speculated that he may have felt provoked by her attractiveness and apparent vulnerability, a common trigger for individuals with his mindset. Lauren's family, devastated by her senseless death, implored the public to eschew vigilante justice and allow the legal system to handle the case. After a 3-day search, Zion Teasley was apprehended in an abandoned garage on the city's outskirts. During his arrest, he resisted and injured a police officer. Subsequently, during questioning, he adamantly denied any involvement in the crime. However, when presented with surveillance footage from the park, he fell silent and requested legal representation. The prosecution swiftly charged Zion Teasley with intentional murder and kidnapping, citing substantial evidence such as video recordings, Lauren's belongings found in the garage, a knife, and DNA and fingerprints found at the crime scene. As a result, the court ordered that he be held in custody without the option for bail. The trial of Zion Teasley began on June 5, 2023, a highly publicized case in the state's history, capturing the attention of the entire nation. Journalists, activists, and concerned citizens gathered outside the courthouse, eager to observe the accused individual. Accompanied by tight security, Zion entered the courtroom in handcuffs, wearing an orange prison outfit, seemingly indifferent. Lauren's family openly displayed their emotions. Her mother wept continuously, while her father glared angrily at the defendant. Friends of the victim, holding her pictures, also attended the proceedings. The prosecutor argued that Zion Teasley was a dangerous and calculated killer who posed a significant danger to society. He emphasized the audacious nature of the crime and the strong evidence against the defendant, portraying Zion as a misogynistic psychopath who took pleasure in causing harm to women. In contrast, Zion's lawyer sought to prove his client's innocence, questioning the presented evidence and suggesting the involvement of another individual in Lauren's death. The defense attorney advised the jury to make their decision based on facts rather than emotions or public opinion, highlighting Zion's difficult upbringing and the harsh treatment he endured in his family. Zion William Teasley currently faces charges of first-degree murder. In December 2023, the Maricopa County Prosecutor's Office pushed for the death penalty, the harshest punishment allowed by Arizona state law for such a serious crime. The Phoenix Police Department concluded their investigation into the case, with the suspect now awaiting trial. There is no information that would indicate that the attack on Lauren Ha was anything other than a random choice of a victim by the perpetrator. Zion Teasley himself does not admit his guilt in committing this brutal murder. He continues to be held in custody without the right to post bail. The trial of the accused is scheduled for October 2025. It is expected that this will be one of the most resonant trials in the history of the state of Arizona. The tragic death of Lauren Heike shook all of America and became a real shock for her family and friends. She, who loved life so much and believed in the goodness of people, became a victim of a cruel and senseless crime. This murder once again reminded society of the importance of public safety and timely response to alarming signals about the inadequate behavior of certain individuals. This story also showed how important the work of law enforcement agencies is, as they were able to promptly find and detain the suspect and gather the necessary evidence of his guilt. Ahead is the judicial review of this case, which should put the final point and determine the measure of responsibility of the murderer. Society hopes that justice will be fair and that the criminal will receive the most severe punishment. Most importantly, the memory of Lauren Heike should live in the hearts of all who knew and loved her. This girl will forever remain young, beautiful, kind, and sincere. Let her story be a warning to everyone. Value life, be careful, and do not be indifferent to those who are near. Hello friends, welcome to Out Channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Caitlin Poirier. On January 12, 2023, CBS News Minnesota broadcasted a 24-second clip regarding the passing of Donald Blum, an elderly man with gray hair. He died on January 10, 2023, at the age of 73 due to natural causes associated with aging. Who exactly was this person who became the subject of the news report? Donald Blum was a well-known figure, known for his violent and criminal activities. He was sentenced to life in prison, and despite his crimes, he met a natural end. Blum's death marks the end of a long tale of violence and wickedness that initiated back in the 1970s. His string of crimes culminated in the brutal killing of Cathy Poirier. Despite his history of violence, Blum managed to escape justice for many years until a chance encounter resulted in his arrest and subsequent punishment. His criminal activities commenced in 1975 when he abducted a young girl, assaulting her and locking her in his car trunk. The girl, however, managed to escape and inform the authorities. Blum was eventually convicted, yet his punishment was considered lenient. By 1978, after gaining his freedom, he committed aggravated assault once more. In 1983, he faced charges of criminal sexual conduct yet again. He also terrorized two young girls in a secluded area with a knife, binding them to a tree, gagging them, and choking one repeatedly before stopping each time, continuing to make threats. The girls were rescued when a passing police patrol noticed their car parked incorrectly and swiftly investigated. Blum escaped into the woods and changed his appearance by dyeing his hair. However, his efforts were in vain, as he was apprehended 2 months later when one of the girls identified him. Blum admitted to committing the crime, but the punishment he received did not succeed in rehabilitating him. In 1992, a psychologist predicted that without close supervision, Blum would return to behaving in an antisocial manner, which was later confirmed by his actions. Despite changing his name, finding employment, and getting married, Blum accumulated 6 felony convictions by May 1999, mostly involving kidnappings and violence. To understand the origin of this cruelty and desire to control others in an average individual like Donald Blum, we must explore his troubled upbringing. Donald Alban Blum was born on February 5, 1949, in Minnesota and held American citizenship. His childhood was marked by abuse from his father that persisted from a young age into his teenage years. Early signs of heavy drinking and behavioral problems emerged during his school years, with school attendance becoming irregular when he reached 10th grade. The trauma from his tumultuous relationship with his father likely contributed to his behavioral issues and alcohol abuse, especially during adolescence. Examining the story from a mentally healthy perspective allows us to trace how the series of events may have led to Donald's actions. On May 26, 1999, Caitlin Poirier disappeared while working alone during the night shift at a convenience store linked to a service station. Surveillance footage showed a large man dressed in jeans, a backwards baseball cap, and a New York Yankees jersey with the number 23, taking Caitlin out of the store around 11:40 p.m. Catherine Harnick, who works at a Subway restaurant near the convenience store where Caitlin went missing, was interviewed by the police. She mentioned seeing a man behaving strangely just before their store closed at around 10 p.m. Later, As she was driving home, she coincidentally saw the same man leaving the convenience store. This series of events highlights how critical moments can eventually lead to actions influenced by deep-rooted trauma and unresolved issues. Harnack noted that the unknown man was driving a black Ford F-150 pickup truck with a cab and white markings on the side. The truck circled the maintenance area several times before heading towards Moose Lake and stopping in the parking lot of a local cafe. She also observed that Kathy's car was still in the parking lot when she left work. Based on her description and partially recovered surveillance camera footage, a rough sketch of the suspected kidnapper was created. The individual was described as having long blonde hair and appearing to be around 25 years old. A composite sketch, based on information from 4 witnesses, was shared on local TV and in newspapers to gather more information. Hundreds of people from across the state joined in the search for Kathy Poirier in the wooded area near the station. Despite efforts with service dogs and helicopters, no trace of her was found. Posters of Kathy were circulated in newspapers and on billboards across the region, turning her disappearance into a high-profile case. The nearby sex offender facility confirmed that all inmates were present, ruling out the possibility of a kidnapping by an escaped offender. Police started searching for the vehicle using its license plate number and identified Donald Blum as a potential suspect. However, the truck in his driveway was white. The official search for Kathy ended on June 6, 1999, without success. However, many volunteers continued their efforts, hoping to find her. Investigators believed that someone might have seen something that could help make a connection and bring her home. They noted that the person who kidnapped Kathy might have made a mistake by taking her from a store with security cameras. Searchers focused on the neighborhood itself because if the perpetrator was familiar enough to return to the area twice at night, then someone might have seen him before. A search headquarters was set up at the Lutheran Church in Moose Lake, where staff members processed leads and volunteers distributed flyers about Kathy. Despite extensive efforts and optimism from many involved in finding her, Kathy was never found. Speculation arose that the kidnapper could be an athlete or a New York Yankees fan, so police sought help from sports figures. After 2 weeks with no results, the police asked Minnesota Twins legend Paul Molitor to make a public service announcement. His appeal caught the attention of Daryl Brown, who worked at the Minnesota Veterans Home. On June 18th, Brown called the hotline to report his co-worker Donald Hutchinson, who had similarities to a composite sketch and had recently changed his appearance. Investigation revealed that Donald Hutchinson was actually Donald Blum. He had a black pickup truck hidden in his garage and owned property near the store where Kathy worked. Further digging showed that Blum had previously been convicted of sex crimes, including kidnapping young girls like Kathy. Investigators quickly obtained a search warrant, and agents from the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension located Blum and his family at a campground 140 miles away from Richfield. They woke him up early in the morning to question him. Blum was taken in for further questioning, where it was discovered that he had bought property in Moose Lake around 2 years ago. Neighbors confirmed his frequent visits before Katie's disappearance, mentioning he had not been seen there since. Blum's supervisor at the Veterans Home claimed to be unaware of Blum's criminal history as he went by the name Hutchinson. The supervisor noted that Blum was reserved and not very sociable. Following his arrest, Donald Blum initially cooperated but later chose not to testify and requested legal representation. Authorities led searches which led to the seizure of various items from Blum's residence, although there was no official statement regarding these items and their relevance to the case. An extensive search was conducted on Blum's 20-acre Moose Lake property, involving over 100 National Guard members and hundreds of volunteers who ventured deep into the woods from his land. Though they had to stop as night fell, they resumed their efforts the following morning. Vigor and Katie's mother expressed optimism about finding her daughter, some believing she might be held against her will. However, the sheriff was less hopeful. On the second day of the search, investigators found bone-like fragments among ashes in a fire pit on Donald Blom's property. These fragments were sent for further testing, confirming their origin as bone fragments. A tooth found in the ashes was sent to odontologists for examination. Dr. Norlander, a certified forensic dentist, performed a thorough examination of the tooth, knowing that DNA from the pulp would likely be destroyed. While examining, she found something that looked like a filling, which confirmed it was a human tooth. This helped her determine if it could have belonged to Katie. Dental fillings are made up of an organic matrix and an inorganic filler. The organic part burns away, but the filler particles remain. Analysts can then identify a specific brand or at least a group of potential brands, since manufacturers use up to 50 different types of fillers, each of which shows up distinctly on dental X-rays. The composition of the filling from Blom's fire pit matched the one used for Katie's teeth. Furthermore, researchers were able to identify it as tooth 18 and deduced that it belonged to a young woman. The likelihood that it was Katie's tooth and not someone else's from the area was very high. One major question remains unanswered. Why was the perpetrator released from prison after kidnapping 7 different girls? If the justice system had functioned properly, Katie might still be alive. Instead, Blom managed to change his name, escape his criminal history, find a job, get married, and assume a new identity, all of which allowed him to continue causing harm. In Katie Poirier's case, Blom was accused of kidnapping and illegal possession of a firearm, a federal offense due to his prior convictions that prohibited him from carrying firearms. He initially declined a plea deal, but later changed his mind, agreeing to testify under certain conditions that allowed him to call his family. On September 8th, Blom made a tearful confession that lasted 2.5 hours. He confessed that on May 26, 1999, he went fishing and then drove back to his home in Richfield later that evening. However, he returned to his home on Moose Lake afterward. On the way, he stopped to buy alcohol and have a drink at a bar. He saw Kathy in the store while she was working. Even though he didn't know her, he grabbed her, forced her into his pickup truck, and took her to his motorhome. Blom explained that he was unsure whether his actions stemmed from guilt, feeling foolish, or another reason, but he eventually strangled and killed her. He strangled her from behind, taking approximately 20 minutes. He denied any other form of assault. After realizing she was deceased, Blom placed her in a fire pit in a fetal position, gathering wood and paper to ignite the fire. Blom's version of events contradicted video footage and evidence found at the burn pit. He claimed Kathy had asked multiple times to be released, although she did not resist until he began choking her on his property. He maintained that he was able to end her life using only his hands. Blom's description of burning the body seemed implausible, as wood and paper alone couldn't generate enough heat to reduce a human body to ashes. When pressed, he admitted that none of it made sense to him. He couldn't explain why he did it. At the end of the interview, Blom contacted 2 local TV stations to confess his actions and requested that his family be left alone by the media. As part of the agreement, confiscated property was returned to his wife Amy Blom, including land on Moose Lake, a residence in Richfield, and the family vehicle. For the Poirier family, the confession was devastating, as they had hoped Kathy was still alive. Blom now asserted that she had been murdered and cremated without any discernible motive apart from an inexplicable nighttime impulse. Shortly after, Blom retracted his confession, attributing it to stress from solitary confinement and medication-induced hallucinations that led him to believe confessing was his only escape from his cell. Consequently, the plea deal was revoked as both sides' legal teams prepared for trial. False confessions manifest in various ways. Sometimes, individuals confess to crimes they didn't commit spontaneously. This can occur in response to high-profile cases. Some people succumb to intense interrogation pressure and confess quickly. Additionally, there's a phenomenon where individuals internalize police accusations and come to believe they were involved in crimes they didn't commit. Blom may have admitted to lying under oath or taken back his statement, leaving the decision to the jury. The trial of Blom commenced in June 2000 and involved an extensive jury selection process lasting 5 weeks, followed by 5 weeks of trial proceedings. More than 50 witnesses, including key individuals, were summoned to testify. The case was presented by Thomas Perler, the assistant prosecuting attorney of Carleton County. Initially, Blom's brother testified that he had given their family a box of old clothing, which included a New York Yankees jersey. This revelation was crucial as Blom had previously denied owning such a garment. Testimonies from 2 women who were kidnapped by Blom in 1983 were particularly damning. They shared their experiences at his hands, shedding light on his behavior towards them when they were young girls, similar to Kathy. Forensic dentists later confirmed that a particular tooth found matched Kathy based on age, gender, and dental records. Expert witness Dr. Ann Norlander initially had doubts about the tooth's identity, but eventually testified with reasonable medical certainty that it belonged to Kathy, based on specific chemicals in the filling material. Additional proof came from surveillance footage from a different store captured in May, showing Blom around the time of Kathy's abduction. His hair, originally gray with blonde tips, verified by his barber, gave him a more youthful look. A pivotal moment in the trial was when Blom's confession was presented in court, with each juror receiving a transcript for examination. The courtroom was filled with the quiet sobs of Kathy's relatives, indicating the strong case against Blom. On August 7th, the lead defense attorney, Rodney Broden, introduced his first witness, Amy Blom, who claimed that her husband was home on the night of Kathy's disappearance. She mentioned recalling seeing a news broadcast the following day about the girl's vanishing act. Amy brought attention to the fact that Katie's disappearance happened near their country house on Moose Lake, which is 110 miles away from their home. Amy considered Blom a suspect due to his criminal record. However, she later recalled his whereabouts on the night prior. Blom had returned home at 9:30 p.m., and by the morning, Amy found coffee ready and saw his spouse at home while they were in bed. Amy mentioned how she felt bullied by the police officers who threatened to take her children if she did not comply with their questioning. She expressed frustration at being called a liar. Moreover, Amy denied ever receiving a baseball jersey from her son-in-law and claimed to have never seen her husband wearing one. During her testimony, Blom was visibly emotional, wiping his eyes in distress. On August 10th, he took the stand to defend himself under oath, denying accusations of kidnapping Kathy Poirier. He spent over 3 hours on the stand, alternating between speaking and crying. Blom portrayed himself as a man in turmoil, claiming his life was in shambles and he was unwell during that period. While he initially confessed to the crime to investigators, Blom later stated that he recanted the confession. He insisted that on the night of the crime, he was at home with his wife, as she had told him, despite being at Moose Lake for fishing earlier in the day. Blom arrived home at 10 p.m. that evening, before Katie was taken. During cross-examination, he had to acknowledge the lies and inconsistencies in his initial statements to the police at the start of the investigation. His courtroom appearance did not sway opinions in his favor, as many perceived him as trying to evade responsibility by portraying himself as a victim. After the questioning ended, Blom seemed frustrated. He turned to the judge, cursed, and asked if he could make one final statement. When the judge denied his request, the case was handed over to the jury. They deliberated for 10 hours, spending 3 hours replaying taped confessions. Ultimately, the jury found Donald Blom guilty, sentencing him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Blom maintained his innocence, declaring, "I never killed anyone." He was confident that he had a strong case for appeal. Despite his belief, in 2004, the appeals court upheld his conviction in an 81-page ruling. While acknowledging that his trial was not perfect, the court deemed it fair and saw no reason to overturn the verdict or order a new trial. The murder of Caitlin Poirier resulted in the enactment of Katie's Law. This legislation involved the creation of a statewide computerized crime-fighting network and stricter regulations for monitoring predatory sex offenders like Blom.